Thank you, Alex. Welcome back, everybody. We are continuing in our conversations on the capital budget. This is the Senate Institutions Committee. Again, today being the 10th day of February 2022. We are shifting gears now from our previous conversations to work on Section 9 of the capital bill initially, and then Section 10. Eric Blatt is back with us along with Pedrick Monks, and I'd say welcome to both of you. Eric, are you planning on leading the charge for this conversation?
Yes, and afternoon, Chair. And we did send in a document that Patrick and I would like to use to present to the committee information on these two sections.
Okay, we can ask Alex to bring that up, and if anybody's got a stopwatch, let's see how fast he can do it. He's working.
So I just got disconnected, and I have been having some difficulties the last few days of losing the connection and then quickly regaining it. So if it gets a little too choppy, I will call in.
Actually, Eric, the best thing for choppiness, I am told, is if you remove or stop your video and continue on with audio, your choppiness should be eliminated. At least if that happens, we can try that and see if it works. Good. We have your presentation on the screen.
Okay. Great. So if we can do what we did last week and just maybe have Alex manage the PowerPoint.
He seems to be doing that right now.
We have 10 slides. This is good. So there's 10 slides.
Eric, you're dropping out on me. We may have to ask you to cut your video and see if we can get you back on with audio.
Yeah, yes, I'm going. This happens one more. Just to make sure, is the number to call in this 646-558-8656? Is that the correct number?
Alex will have to answer that question.
I believe it is. If it says the one touch mobile, I think that's what you want.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So if I get disconnected again, I'm going to call in on that line. So I'm going to try to go through this really quickly because we have 10 slides. This is basically the same presentation testimony that we provided to house correction institutions over a 2-hour period. So if I got the schedule right, I think we only have a half an hour.
I was going to say, we're hoping you have the Reader's Digest version at the moment.
Yes, well, we won't go into anywhere near the amount of detail that we did with house corrections. So Very quickly, the areas of the budget proposal that we're talking about are these 4 lines, line 72, 73, 88, 89. So we will just go right to the next slide.
You're on. Eric, did we lose you?
It's not changing. Okay.
We see it, Eric.
We see page 2.
I'm sorry. Everything just froze. Great. Okay. So this is just an
Yeah, we're losing you again, Eric. It would appear Eric is trying to go out and come back in.
May I also just try calling? We'll see.
So, okay, I'm back on. Patrick, you're going to probably have to fill in
That's fine.
As I get cut off here.
We can hear you now.
Okay, so this is just a simple illustration. Okay, this is just a basic illustration of how the state revolving funds work. So this applies to both the drinking water state revolving fund and the clean water state revolving fund. What this diagram shows is the state match, the 20% coming into the fund, the annual federal grant that we receive coming into the fund, and the on the right-hand side shows SRF.
You're trying valiantly, Eric, but I think we've lost you again.
Yep.
We got you.
We can hear you at the moment.
You can. I'm calling in right now. Sorry.
That's okay.
646. Guess that's what happens up here in the Northeast Kingdom. We're on the edge.
Yeah.
Now, what part of the
Okay.
kingdom are you calling in from?
I'm right on the edge. I'm in Hyde Park.
You still with us?
Sounds like he was calling.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm gonna keep plodding along. So we can move on to the third slide.
SRF Funding Cycle.
Yeah, I can maybe pick it up while he's calling. So our funding cycle of how we, take in funds and make awards, starts, right around now. We'll be releasing our draft. It's at the top. Well, right now we're receiving public notice. We have public notice to receive what says PPL apps, number 1, right around 11 o'clock. PPL is project priority list. So projects that want to receive construction funding send in their application to us through over a month long or so period, and they're all reviewed and scored. That's happening right now. As a result, once we have all those projects in, we'll proceed to
Yeah, Patrick, the process of reviewing funds, is there a board that does that, an individual? How does that work?
So what we're reviewing are the applications to receive funds, and that's done, internally in the Water Investment Division. Eric oversees our design and construction engineers. So there's a team of them that reviews each application against established ranking criteria.
Okay.
Depending on, what the project accomplishes, the public health elements, and so on and so forth, that results in a score. Once we have all those things, all those projects ranked, that helps inform our intended use plan, the IUP. The IUP, identifies how much federal grant money we have coming in, the state match, and it establishes the types of funding categories and how much subsidy will be awarded. Subsidy is loan forgiveness. So a project may come in and receive nothing but may receive just a pure loan, or some fraction of it may be forgiven in the subsidy. Once we the priority list applications help us understand the extent of need and the type of need. And so we draft that intended use plan. It'll go out for public comment and public hearing this spring. Then down around here, number 4, late spring, we have a final intended use plan and project priority list. And at that point, funds become available for that fiscal year. Number 6, it says construction summer and beyond. Projects can be in the funding cycle for quite some time, and the planning cycle. So it's not like they go to construction necessarily that fall. They may go to construction the following year, and construction can take place over several years for the larger projects.
So once an application comes in, an IUP is developed, and you present all of that for a public hearing, does the public actually have the ability to weigh in and vote on projects that are proposed?
No, the public can weigh in, and I haven't been through the process. I started with the program back in August. I think the public can comment on the way we scored a project and whether we scored it appropriately. The public can also comment on, how we are making the subsidy available. So each federal grant we get specifies the amount of subsidy we can award. It's usually a percentage. Sometimes it's a range. And sometimes it's not too, it's a specific. It shall be 40%. So we can decide as part of the IUP, is that subsidy going to go towards planning loans, construction loans, certain categories of projects? The public doesn't get to vote and say, I think this specific project is the most important, fund it. They can say, there's this need. We recommend that subsidy be, go towards this category of projects.
Okay.
But again, they're the ranking of the projects, which determines whether they do get funded, because there's usually more demand than funds. That's again, they can question the ranking of a particular project. They don't get to vote on whether it should be ranked higher. We can go to the next one unless you have more questions on this one.
No, we're good.
This one covers uses of the SRF funds, the types of projects we fund. On the clean water side, we fund planning and construction loans for municipal wastewater projects, stormwater, combined sewer overflow, and also for private clean water projects. On the drinking water side, we have planning and construction loans for public water systems. Public water system is defined as I'm going to go back to 4. A public water system can be privately owned. It consists of, right there it says, at least 25 people. The cutoff is right around 15 homes and or 25 full-time residents. There's about 700 of these systems in Vermont. About 400 are community systems and 300 are non-community systems. Half of those are schools. We also, on the drinking water side, we are allowed to use a percentage of the federal grant for what are called set-asides. That funds programs primarily out of our drinking water and groundwater protection division to provide technical assistance and the likes. And also support the regulatory programs that do the permitting and oversight of the public water systems. All right, next slide. Feel free to stop me at any point. And with any luck, Eric will find his way back here. So available funds.
I am.
All right, good timing. We're on.
Yes, it seems to be stable at the moment. So, yep. So
That's what they say about our chair.
for the moment. Okay.
Sorry, Eric. They try at humor. It's often a little awkward, but they try.
If we could just slide this one up just a hair, because there's some notes at the bottom. I don't know if
Maybe reduce it.
Okay, so there we go. So this slide shows basically all of the federal monies coming into the program, which includes both the base dollars for clean water and drinking water combined. These are separate funds, but for purposes of discussing these programs, and because they run parallel to one another in so many respects, we decided to just combine everything. So base grants right now projected to be 19 million. We don't have the allotments yet from EPA, so we don't know the precise amounts. So the presumption is it'll be level funded. Could be slightly different, could be a little more, could be a little less. But basically, it's 11 million in drinking water grant funding and about a little under 8 million on the clean water side. The middle circle represents all of the supplemental funds, and there's 5 separate grants, 3 on the drinking water side and 2 on the clean water side, that total 63 million. And the last circle is the state match for both the base funds and the supplemental. The base funds, we have to match at 20%, but the supplementals, we only have to match at 10%, and we don't have to match all of the supplemental grants. So between these two programs, there are 7 individual grants that would be coming to Vermont as part of the federal fiscal year 22 funding for these programs.
And is that reflected in section 9?
Yes, these are all dollars in section 9. In fact, I believe, yes, I think it's line 74 that has, I'm sorry, line 73 are the clean water and drinking water match dollars for the supplemental grants. So the match for the base drinking water is in section 9, that's line 72. And line 73, which is part of section 9, is combining clean water and drinking water into one single appropriation that matches all of the federal supplemental dollars.
Okay.
And then some notes at the bottom, just to indicate that there's additional funding that comes into the programs through both carry forward from prior fiscal year if monies aren't fully utilized. And we don't really know what that total will be yet because there's still loans being awarded through the end of this state fiscal year. But anything that's left over will just be carried forward into the next fiscal year. And that's why we just have indicated to be determined. And then lastly are the repayments. Between the two funding programs, we are revolving on the order of $18 million a year at this point. The clean water program has been around now for 35 years and drinking water for 25. So the programs are getting to a pretty mature state where we're getting a substantial amount coming back in from prior loans. So we can move to the next slide unless there's a question on this. So these are the 5 supplemental grants and the different categories. So on the clean water side, the supplemental grant is basically it's referred to as general because it has the same eligibilities as the base funding does. One additional requirement with this grant is that 49% of it has to be provided in the form of subsidized loans. And it's an absolute amount. It's not an up to. So close to half of the federal grant for the general supplemental grant has to be provided in the form of loan subsidy. The other grant, supplemental grant under the clean water program, is what's referred to as emerging contaminants. And that actually goes out at 100%. And there is no match requirement for that particular grant. So similarly on the drinking water side, same rules apply to the general supplemental. That grant has to go out with with an absolute amount of 49% subsidy. It has a 10% match, and it's eligible for any projects that are currently eligible under the drinking water SRF. And then the last two, emerging contaminants, similar to clean water. There's funding specifically for emerging contaminants that goes out at 100% subsidy. There's no match required. And then lastly is lead service line replacement funding. That supplemental grant requires 49% subsidy overall. And one thing point out with this 49% subsidy, it doesn't mean that every loan we put out has 49% forgiveness in it. It means that an amount equal to 49% of the grant has to go out in the form of subsidy. So the amount of subsidy could vary from one loan to the next.
Okay.
Okay, we move to slide 7. And this just summarizes the dollar amounts of subsidy to go along with those percentages. So first circle is the clean water base grant, $3.5 million roughly in subsidy, drinking water base grant, roughly $5.4 million. And the supplementals in total between the two programs is roughly $35 million. And remember, there's about 63 million that's coming to Vermont in the form of these supplemental grants. So it's a little more than half of that goes out as subsidy. And the reason it's skewed to the 50%, given that we have several that require 100% forgiveness, is that the supplementals that require 100% forgiveness are much smaller amounts compared to the general supplemental and the lead supplemental. Okay, we can go to slide 8. And this is just summarizing the amounts that are in the budget adjustment. So again, organized by the 2 sections and the rows. And we'll talk a little bit about the line 89 request on the next couple of slides. So this is just to indicate that of the amount that we're requesting for pollution control grants, 585,000 of that total has been identified as available to be swapped with ARPA dollars. So I think this is part of the overall cap of 15 million that is available for water and sewer projects. It's available ARPA dollars that can be swapped out with capital dollars that frees up the capital dollars for other projects. So this is a piece of that. Then if we move to the next slide. So the 2,715,000, which is the capital funded portion of the pollution control grants, is the sum of this first figure, the 2,385,000, and then the third figure of 330,000. The reason this is split out this way, and the reason that some of these monies are available for the shift to ARPA dollars is because these are held out for match monies that are needed for another grant that we don't in our program administer, but it is administered by the department. This is for the Lake Champlain Basin program. So the Lake Champlain Basin program uses the federal grant that's received for that program, actually uses the state pollution control dollars as a match to that federal grant. And so we had identified the portion of the pollution control grant that would likely go to Lake Champlain Basin projects, and so held that out separately from ARPA potential funding. So we went through a lot of material very quickly. I don't know if there are questions.
Well, let me say first that the presentation this afternoon is to give us a really high level view of what's coming at us when we finally get the capital bill. And if people do have questions that are far down in the weeds, we will have an opportunity to have you guys back. But for the moment, I'll throw it open to the committee to see if anybody has any questions at this stage. And we can take the screen share down, Alex, so I can see people. Thank you. Any comments, questions, committee? You've either bored them to death, Eric, or they're digesting everything perfectly. So let me say again that I know that these numbers are presented to us in a quick fashion, and that the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions, which does have the capital bill, may very well be operating on numbers that end up different than the ones we have just seen on the screen. And in the event that that happens, we probably will have you back to have some more conversation about what the needs are versus what they've done. That's the polite way of saying we'll fix whatever they screwed up. Beyond that, I want to thank you gentlemen for coming by. We will have an opportunity to meet with you again. And thanks for putting together a presentation for us this afternoon.
Good. Thank
We'll
you.
see you again.
Thank you.
Oh, and
Have a
Eric,
nice day.
Eric, I forgot to tell you that last time I checked, Hyde Park is in Lamoille County. There's a real fine
Well, I
line
just said it's
between.
right on the edge.
Okay, I just want to make that real important. That's a clarification that needed to be said. We do understand our geography here in the state.
We're kindred spirits.
Okay,
We're kindred spirits with those live in the Northeast Kingdom.
well, we know Hyde Park wishes it was in the Northeast Kingdom, so we'll keep it there. Thanks again for coming by.
Thank you.
Committee, we are going to shift major gears at this point, and we're going to talk about the ongoing subject of what to do about a facility for justice-involved youth. Let me tee up the conversation by saying one of the proposals that has been floated to us is a bill called S-245, which some of you may recall has been introduced by Senator Hooker to talk about revamping the Windsor facility. We have that conversation going on at the same time that the town of Newbury has objected to having a facility within its borders. And I am trying to get as much information from all sides about both of those towns to get some handle on what it is we should be thinking about, whether it ends up in one of these two towns or none of these two towns. But we are still in the stage of discussing what is out there on the table, so to speak. And as part of that conversation, for this afternoon's purposes, we've invited many folks from the town of Windsor, as well as the executive director of the Vermont State Employees Association, who I'm sure has an interest in whatever we end up building and wherever and how state employees are going to interact with that facility. So let me welcome all of you folks. Steve Howard's been with us before, but for those of you from the town of Windsor, I'm just going to give you a quick spiel about what this process is about. We are on YouTube, which means we have a listening and viewing audience that we have no idea who's out there. So when we're talking about things that all of us may be very familiar with, and we're rolling right along using vernacular and acronyms that we're familiar with, I may occasionally interrupt your testimony just to get us all onto the same page in plain English for those who may be listening for the first time on YouTube who have never been involved in this process before. I am willing to hear what anybody has to say. We will, as a committee, take that into consideration. I do have to give you fair warning that at 4 o'clock, I personally have a dead stop. So in the event that we run out of time, Steve, I've got you on last in the conversation, so hopefully you come back from time to time anyway. But I would really like to hear from the folks from Windsor and make sure they get their testimony in. But even if we run beyond 4 o'clock and all of you folks from Windsor have not had your pitch played out the way you wanted it, if we need to bring you back, we will do that. And so I want to make sure that you do understand we are not trying to plow you through and get rid of you. We are literally hamstrung for time today, and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to say what they want to say. The first person I have on my list is Tom Marsh, the town manager of Windsor. Tom, welcome to Senate Institutions. I don't know whether you personally had planned to lead off the conversation or you wanted somebody else to do that. But I will say to you first that as you introduce yourself, it would be most helpful for our listening audience, and this goes for all of the witnesses, if you give us a 30-second rundown of who you are and how you fit into this puzzle, that would be most appreciated for basic introductory purposes. So Tom, coming back to you, my first statement to you is my heartiest condolences for having to have Senator McCormick as one of your state senators. Welcome to Senate Institutions.
Well, thank you very much. Senator McCormick has done okay by me in my 10 years here. So what he does outside of that purview, I'm not even going to pay attention to. He treats me okay. So thanks
Good
to
to
that.
know.
Thank you, Tom.
I'll be glad to go first. I think there's 4 of us here that have similar but a bit different messages. My background is I've been the town manager of Windsor since August of 2011. I'm becoming one of the few people who has been involved in this process since the facility was closed, and prior to that, to see the changing uses that went along with that facility. So I've been through some of this a bit before. There's a bit of a continuity to this process that I'm aware of, but I don't want to bore people if I'm going over stuff that everyone knows. I'll be glad to take a break and clarify anything that I may go over. The testimony I'm about to give is more focused on the history of Vermont corrections in the town of Windsor. Some may be very familiar with that, others may not. But we've had a state of Vermont correctional facility in here since 1908. So we're a bit familiar, and we've had some great successes and some difficult patches through all that. But I just wanted to bring my testimony to have some of that perspective of the history that we have with the town and why we have developed the opinions as a community that we will be expressing today. Good enough?
That's perfect.
All right. Well, then I'll just run through a little bit. And as I stated, Windsor has been the home of a state correctional facility since 1808. And over that 200+ years of history, the facilities evolved to meet the changing needs of the state, and eventually both the Vermont State Penitentiary and the Southeast State Correctional Facility were closed because they no longer met their mission. The state penitentiary closed in the mid-1970s, and the process used to repurpose that facility is as valid today as it was almost 50 years ago. The town of Windsor encourages the state to consider a similar process in an effort to get a broader perspective of potential uses that will benefit us all. Today, the former state penitentiary provides approximately 70 units of housing, a use nobody envisioned when the structure was closed. Originally, the state legislature appropriated $150,000 to demolish the building. A few unique inquiries did come in for potential uses, ranging from blowing it up as part of a Hollywood movie to turning it into a discotheque called the Cell Block, where all the staff would be wearing familiar black and white outfits. At the time, Richard Raymond, who was the director of purchasing for the division of the Agency of Administration, put the word out that little hope of success, that there would be anyone interested who wanted to buy the building, but nonetheless, he did move forward and put out an RFP to try to sell it to the private sector. And as it turns out, in July of 1975, a developer from Boston saw the ad in the New England Real Estate Journal that the state was accepting bids. The firm specialized in renovating obsolete buildings and had done over $400 million of renovation projects like that to date. Key property components when looking at a potential project included structurally sound building, which the prison farm has some not, access to sewer, the prison farm has that, and land around the building, which the prison farm does. Intrigued by this unusual opportunity, they strategized to come up with an appropriate bid. Thinking a competitor may choose a round number like 25,000, the firm figured 27,000 may work, but when they got extra crafty, they decided 27,050 would be the number. Time was tight. They flew a representative from Boston up to Montpelier. I didn't even know you could do that. And the guy had a check for 10% in case he was successful. And indeed, he was successful. They received a total of 5 bids. 2 were slightly above zero. The remaining bids were, the next highest one was about half of the 27,000 that was bid. So the company won. And instead of spending $150,000 to tear it down, they got a check for $27,050. A turnaround of $177,050, which today would equate to about $1 million. As was noted at the time, residents were enthusiastic about the project, which maintained the architectural importance of this imposing downtown building while providing much needed housing. Something, again, familiar today. There are so many similarities between the situation in 1975 and today that the story cannot be ignored. The success of the project, a project that was not even thought of by those involved up to that point, up to the point where imminent demolition was considered. The town of Windsor believes that the best chance for success on the prison farm is for the legislature to clarify its intention to sell, lease, or keep the property. Should sale or lease be considered to offer a bid opportunity similar to the one in 1975? And we believe the most recent suggestion of considering multiple uses on the property would be part of that equation. And should the state decide not to sell or lease the property, we believe it's imperative that funding be allocated to address the current unsafe structures and remove this public safety concern from the property. The history noted in this document was prepared by Charles Morrissey in a brief publication that he authored, I think, in the early 1980s called The Closing of the Windsor Prison. Windsor is unique in its experiences. I don't think any other town could boast of the commitment that we've made to this line of state service. And looking forward, we would just like to see a broad-based search for a use that benefits all Vermonters. Thank you.
Appreciate that. I'm not sure, committee, if you have any questions for Tom, or should we move on to our next witness? I see no.
We may have questions later, but we should move on.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Michael McNaughton, Select Board Chair of Windsor. Welcome to Senate Institutions.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today to be able to speak. I am the Select Board Chair for Windsor. I have been on the board for 5 years, around there. I was on the board back in 2017 when the prison did close. So I know a little bit about and been involved in the discussions prior. My testimony today is going to focus more on the direction where us as a community wants to head. So is that a good introduction?
Oh, sure.
Yes. All right, so I'll jump right in. So in 1808, the cornerstone for the Vermont State Prison was laid in Windsor. 209 years later, in 2017, the Southeast State Correctional Facility, or the prison farm, closed its gate for the last time. For over 2 centuries, Windsor has been home to a state correctional facility. Understanding that every community must have vision beyond its borders, we accepted the role and responsibilities that came with the facility. Now that it's closed, the community has expressed a clear desire to move in a new direction. 200 years reflects a significant track record of commitment to the state, and now Windsor is focused on putting the land and facility to more inspired use. Fortunately, we have already seen inspiration, as demonstrated when the state and the town worked collaboratively to establish the Windsor Grasslands Wildlife Management Area in 2017. 826 acres are now managed and protected for the enjoyment of all Vermonters and those who travel to our area. In 2018 and in 2021, townwide surveys were conducted to get a sense of community sentiment for potential use of the property. In both surveys, 2/3 of residents either opposed or strongly opposed repurposing the remaining acres for correctional or social services purposes. The same surveys indicate support or consideration for a wide range of uses, from housing to state offices outside of human services, commercial development, or incorporation into the wildlife management area. In addition to Windsor's opposition to a correctional facility or human services use, the state has expressed significant reservations for such uses in the past. In multiple reports conducted since the facility's closing, most notably a report to the legislature on AHS major facilities conducted in 2018, shortcomings of the facility, the property, and surrounding economic base were noted. Conversely, the recently completed December 2021 report to the legislature on the use of the former Southeast State Correctional Facility concludes, a strategic plan needs to be developed for the site that includes the cost and benefit of state or private ownership of the site. A plan would include a large state corrections or social services facility at the site would not be supported by the town of Windsor. The legislature needs to appropriate additional funding for the site outside of the present maintenance funding to support the demolition of unwanted or blighted structures on the site. The legislature needs to decide on the disposition of the property. The lack of clarity on whether the legislature wants to maintain ownership, sell, or lease the property makes redevelopment efforts difficult given this uncertainty. The existing statutory provisions, as stated above, adds to the uncertainty. The sale of the site will require the state to spend a significant amount of money for the demolition and clearance of the site. The site in its present condition is not attractive to the private sector given the significant redevelopment costs. Another possibility is a public-private partnership that would redevelop the site in a campus-like setting. That would include small state facilities, housing, office space, businesses, and recreational facilities where the state would maintain a small footprint. The town of Windsor supports these conclusions and strongly encourages the legislature to address the failing buildings and consider the prospect of a public-private partnership. If such a partnership were to be considered, the inclusion of a corrections or social services facility would still not be supported, as we firmly believe that such a facility would cloud the potential development of remaining parcels. Thank you.
Mike, I want to be clear about a couple of things. First, let me ask, is my Vermont history correct that Windsor actually was the host of the very first Vermont penitentiary?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
I'm seeing Donna shaking her head yes, so my history is recalled correctly. A heck of a thing to be remembered for, but nevertheless, it is part of your history. My understanding is that when the survey went out, there were 3,559 individuals living in the town of Windsor. Am I close enough for government work?
Yeah, I think that's about
Yep.
right. Yep.
Did a survey go out to every single one of the town residents?
This survey, or Tom, do you want to explain how the survey goes out during those times during budget?
Sure. Each year we put out a community survey late November, early December. It's distributed through a electronic newsletter that my office puts out that has a little over 1,000 subscribers to, or recipients. Our Facebook page has over 4,000, and then we put hard copies around for those who may not have access to electronic media for them to fill out personally. So we normally get in the neighborhood of 250 to 350 respondents. So round numbers, we would say 8 to 10% of the total, and maybe 15% of the adults.
Okay, as I understand it, in this particular survey, you got 250 folks, give or take one or two, responding to the survey. Is that safe to say?
Sure. Yep.
Yep.
And of that number, approximately 180 answered the question about the future of the Windsor facility?
Sounds right.
Okay, so when you initially said 2/3 of the survey respondents had answered with respect to the Windsor facility that it would not be a welcome addition to have a facility of this sort, I just want to identify what kind of facility we were talking about at that time, because I've heard a couple of different things. I'm not trying to pick on you. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what I understand the presentation here is about. At the time, was the survey targeted at a justice-involved youth facility of roughly 6 to 10 beds?
No.
Okay. Am I safe then in assuming that at the present time, the town of Windsor has not weighed in on that particular question of a youth involved it's getting late. Justice involved youth facility of about 6 to 10 beds. Has that question actually been asked and answered in a town-wide survey?
It has not. That wasn't on the table. The most, I guess, the closest specific use that the community was aware of was a report that was requested to review the appropriateness of a transitional housing facility. That was done in 2017. That was rejected along the same lines. And there wasn't a specific question, but that was the use that was being discussed at that time. And then our community discussions, including one of our select board meetings that had Secretary Gobel, as well as a Commissioner of Corrections, Building General Services, our entire legislative delegation, had a pretty broad-based discussion of what social services and corrections would look like. So not a specific question, but I think it had the majority of the community have a clear understanding of what is involved in those kinds of services.
So there has not been, am I safe in assuming this, there has not been a presentation by DCF about what such a facility as is proposed in Newbury might be considered for the town of Windsor?
No, my understanding is this idea is a couple of weeks old, 3 weeks old or so, but other than news reporting, letting the community know that it's under consideration in the legislature, that hasn't been discussed. Anecdotally, when the news reports have come out, I have been, the residents and the board has been pleased with the direction that has been expressed in our opposition to that idea.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the clarification. I'm not trying to pin you down or anything like that. I just want to make sure I understand what the playing field looks like right now. And it's all information we've got to take into account. This is a heck of a lot of money we're talking about trying to invest, and we have a problem that needs to be fixed. So I want to make sure that every discussion we have about this facility is something we are all on the same page with as far as the committee is concerned. Committee, any questions thus far for either Tom or Mike? Well, so far you guys are doing really well. Donna Sweeney, you are chair of the Windsor Improvement Commission. Welcome to Senate Institutions.
Thank
The floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for your service. I can understand it must be quite difficult to be doing legislation vis-a-vis the Zoom. But let me introduce myself. I'm Donna Sweeney. I'm chair of the Windsor Improvement Corporation. I am not speaking for Windsor Improvement Corporation. However, we will be meeting next Thursday and we will be taking this issue up and discuss how we will reach out to the community and what we will do with the with this bill and what we will think about it. But I am want to talk to you because I've been lived in Windsor for 45 years. I was on the select board in the mid-'80s. And here in Windsor. And I also, before that, I worked in Connecticut at a school for juvenile delinquents, the Long Lane School for Delinquents in Connecticut, for 5 years. And then 6 years on the select board here in Windsor. I chaired it for a couple of years. And then 20 years as a state representative representing the town of Windsor to the legislature. So I have some knowledge of the prison and Windsor. So in the mid-'80s, while I was a member of the Windsor Select Board, the Cunin administration proposed a large facility in town. The town voted against it, as did the Select Board. Under the Snelling administration, the facility was built in Springfield. One of the drawbacks was that the facility and the farm, as we refer to it, it's not easy to get there. It's out of the way and you have to go past the school, the hospital. So that was one of the big issues. So then for having such a big facility in Windsor, then the farm became a facility for long-term sex offenders. So they were there for a while. Then it became a housing for more at-risk offenders and razor wire went up. Then during that time, the carpentry, metal industries, the Vermont industries, as well as the license plates had been worked and developed in Windsor, but then that was closed and moved to another facility. Then it was refitted for women and became that facility in October of 2003. Farming and greenhouses were put in place. The cost of transportation for Windsor to the courts the transportation for the women to the courts and family visits became excessive, having women so far from the major population areas of the northwestern part of Vermont. Then they were moved out of there and that was closed. Men did come back to the farm for a period of time, but the facility closed again. Meanwhile, in the interim, Representative Alice Emmons and I in 2017 worked together to have a major portion of the land, the 800 acres, except for the part that was the facility, the prison facility was on, moved over to fish and wildlife for wildlife management. Town is very happy with that. They've always fished there and hunted there, and birding is like the people come from all over the world to see the birds there. So now the discussion of putting a youth facility there. Over the years, much money has already been spent on refitting and retrofitting the facility for the next emergency state has. S245 is another iteration of the state owns the land. Let's just put our most recent emergency needs there. Youth centers are not cheap. I worked in one for 6 years. They're not cheap. And to temporarily place young folks in the rundown buildings is unfair to them and to the staff that will care for them. And it has been unfair to the staff. They have been jerked around over the years of coming. They're going to be there. They're not going to be there. The women are going to be there. You got to get rid of the men because you're going to have women. So it's been this ping pong going on forever. So youth centers are not cheap, and to temporarily place the young people in this facility is unfair to them. And to make this secure enough for youth, it will cost the state much in education and rehabilitation costs. I'd love to talk to you about what it is to have a youth center like that. It is also unfair to the town of Windsor. With this ping pong approach to the property, Windsor is half the size of most towns in the state. We have 12,000 acres. A third of that is owned by the state. So only 8,000 acres is available for any taxable use. The most recent study, which has been reported, has submitted to the legislature, discussed the possibility of a much better use for the land that can benefit both the town and the state by developing a plan for private or public housing, which is a need for the area. Mount Scottney Hospital is our biggest employer and it is in desperate need for workforce housing, as is the case throughout the Upper Valley. So please give consideration to allowing this 100 plus acres to be put to a better use and do the serious long-term planning for a long-term facility that can be used to help and rehabilitate youth. Thank you very much.
Any
Questions?
questions for Donna, committee? Donna, when you were in the legislature, what committees did you serve on?
I served totally on House government operations, and I chaired it for 12 years with my good friend Ola.
As he was mine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Miss him. I hope his picture's still up there on the wall.
I believe it is, actually.
Oh, good, good.
I'm curious about a couple of things. We made the decision to close Woodside. We have in front of us a proposal right now for the town of Newbury, which has no state land. We would be leasing the land and essentially renting it from a private corporation from out of state. Town of Newbury has virtually no support services, from police to hospital to fire, you name it, that would effectively create a good locale for a Woodside replacement. Conversely, Windsor, I'm not talking about short term, I'm talking about long term, does have state land, has a facility that is certainly not up to snuff for what we all want to have happen, But in the event that the investment was made for a permanent facility, you know the town as well as anybody, and we're talking about 6 to 10 beds. Windsor, it occurs to me, has not just a hospital nearby, but all of the support services that one would be hoping for youth who are involved in this situation. I'm not sure that there aren't other options in other towns. There probably are, and they should be investigated. But knowing what you do about the legislative process and the length of time it gets anything to be done with state government, I'm just scratching my head, given that 180 people are formally objecting to this. There are probably more. But at least what we have so far, as I understand it, nobody has had a serious conversation yet about a permanent facility as opposed to a short-term facility in a building that is just not up to snuff. Should we be pursuing this nevertheless, or should we be not? I mean, I'm still at the point where I'm trying to figure out, do we even take up the bill that's in front of us to have the conversation go forward? You've been involved in the process as well in Connecticut, which is an important factor for me. So
Right.
I'm trying to get a handle on what is it we should be doing as a committee right now.
I think you should be looking at all where they are now. You know,
Which
what
is a
sites-
mess. Which is a
Yeah.
mess. There's no doubt about that.
and looking at the geographics as well, because that's what happened with the women. When we put the women, it brought the women down here, and then realized how much money was being spent transporting the women back up to Burlington, to wherever. And I think when you talk about putting kids in a secure place, 100 acres in that area, I mean, you're going to have to put a lot of reservoir. My knowledge of when I worked in Connecticut, they built a big secure building next to this open campus to keep those really tough kids in there. They were out somebody got out within a couple weeks of the building being opened. So you really have to take all that into consideration. And I don't know that you need to have, a place with 100 acres for these young people. And what will happen, I promise you what will happen, the minute you start building it, they will come. They will come. It won't be just 6. It won't be just 10. It'll get to be 15 and 20. They'll just, because we can dump them here. But if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to hire 3 times the faculty for every kid that's there, if not 4 or 5 times, because you've got to educate them. You've got to give them therapy, health care, and security. So you have to have a secure workforce that's a place for the workforce that's going to be there to take care of them. I think you need to take the time, but I know it's, the legislative process is long and hard. But as I understand now, we do have some money. And I think we start looking at what, not retrofit, but what we could build, where, and should it be near the mental health facilities that we have in the area, which would make in the Barry or Berlin, which would be helpful as well to have that kind of facility available, because you're going to have kids that you're going to have to put into, we tried not to call restraints, but you're going to have kids that are going to have to be put in timeout and moved into different places to cool down or whatever. And sometimes it's helpful to have a facility close by that can help you with the mental health issues. But for my concern is, we'll talk about it at Windsor Improvement Corporation. And one of the things with Windsor we've been talking about is, we have such little land we can develop and places we can go. And housing is such an issue. And WIC does own some property that we're right now working with Evernorth on some housing for folks. But we really do need places for people for workforce to live. And that's why we look at this 100 acres, 100+ acres, and say this would be a beautiful spot. And it's right on the border of a beautiful, beautiful land management park. So.
Senator Mazza had his hand up.
Yes.
Donna, I think you said it well. I think Windsor has done their part over the years of many, many years, a couple hundred years in being the prison town, for example. And I think if we're going to do a children's facility, should be more centrally located where they have services and not just one corner of the state. And I think Windsor is rightfully opposed because they've, so to speak, they served their time. I think they've done well for the state over the years. And I think you've hit all the high points there. And I think it's something the state ought to consider more centrally located for the services. And Windsor has done their part for 200 years. And it's time to, when you mention Windsor, it's always a state prison. That's a name. And I think it's time to get away from that name all the time, a Windsor State Prison, even though it's not there. So I thank you for your comments.
And I thank you too.
Other committee members have questions, comments? Senator McCormick. You're muted, Dick.
Oh, we had hoped to hear from Tom Kennedy, the Regional Planning Commission. He was not able to come in this afternoon. In your planning, do you have any sense of where the Planning Commission comes down on the idea of putting a corrections facility there?
Well, you got the latest report, and Tom headed that committee. So yeah. I think it's kind of laid out there that, a public or private, that the state has to make a decision. What's going to happen to the property? If I were queen for a day, I'd say, oh God, give it back to the town, or we'll work on an RFP to get that land into some good development hands. And I think there are developers out there. I think there are people out there who would be more than willing, if they knew that the state was going to clean it up and say, okay, here, we'll make this exchange or whatever. But I do think it would make a big difference. And before, you remember Vince Aluzzi coming down, and that was a horrible. Yes, people weren't too happy with that idea of putting a prison here again and expanding the prison. So, yeah, I think that would be, from what the report says, that would be what Tom would be looking at, and I'm sure he'll be back to talk to you about it too.
Would it be safe in assuming that the cannabis proposal, the guy that thought the razor wire being up would be an opportunity for him to develop a cannabis growing operation there, that's also out the window as far as
yeah, I think so. I think that, find other places,
Okay, Donna, when were
instead of being the prison town,
we could be the drug town. Yeah, good.
When were you in the legislature?
1997 to 2016, 15, 16.
Yeah, you're in the House my first term.
Yeah.
Ron Huber.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I was. Yeah.
Ron always loved you. Ron was one of my mentors. So.
Oh, yes. How's he doing?
He's doing good.
I love Ron too. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming back. I hope you enjoyed your few moments on Senate institutions. Probably wasn't as much fun as government ops.
No. Yeah, but much fun. Thank you very much.
I want to turn to the town's obvious curmudgeon, John Mcgovern. My good friend, John, by the way. Welcome, John, to Senate Institutions. I'm allowed to call him that. So, John, you are simply listed as John Mcgovern of Windsor. And I have no idea what capacity you're coming to us from. So perhaps you could give our YouTube listening audience a little bit of a background, please.
Well, can you hear me? I hope this iPhone works. Good.
Good.
I guess I'm here primarily as an abutter. We live next door to the to the, well, what's now the Windsor Grasslands Wildlife Management Area. But I'm also I'm a member of an endangered species in Vermont.
Go
I'm
ahead,
the-
tell him. Go ahead, tell him.
I'm chairman of the Windsor Town Republican Committee, but that's not the hat I'm wearing. So as an abutter and a citizen of Windsor
Excuse
for
me,
a
let
long
me just,
time.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, may I just jump in? Mr. McGovern also ran against me for Senate and made me work very hard to get reelected. And I considered him a more than worthy adversary.
Well, thank you, Dick. We'll take it from there.
Yeah.
So as an abutter, I am a citizen of Windsor for 20 years. I urge you guys to, you distinguished members of this committee and the chairman, to reject this bill. Do whatever you wish with it, how you dispose of it is
I
up to you.
just want to back up a little bit there, John. You said the distinguished members of the committee and the chair. Those two terms mutually exclusive.
We have to put up with the chair every day.
Yeah.
I meant to say to thank the chairman and the honorable members of the committee, but the chairman is certainly honorable and distinguished.
Oh, boy. Which one are we talking about?
Does that pick up a vote, do you think?
I'm hoping that Alex has this all in transcription by now.
Can we have a roll call on that one?
Oh dear. I
Our
think
chair
I've
will want
stepped into it.
Our chair will want this journalized, but you can be sure.
YouTube is forever.
Well,
Okay.
I know you guys, time isn't, I been on the other end of this, but in Massachusetts, and you're being very polite and kind and generous, but your time is important. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. The bottom line is, I think this, decisions like this, and I'm sure you agree with me, should be as non-political as possible. And it's hard to take politics out of it totally, but should be based on, sound public interest, what's in the interests of the people of Vermont. And there've been, as stated earlier, 3 or 4 reports already done by various state agencies pursuant to, acts. I see an Act 84, Act 85, Act 151. I don't know the name of the bill that produced the most recent committee to look at various uses of, mostly having to do with various uses for Windsor. Some had larger responsibilities than that, to look at the whole state, but they all looked at Windsor was always part of the equation, and it was always rejected for one reason or another. I can see quotes from them. Some of the quotes sound very pertinent to this. One of them speaks to renovating the existing buildings would be so extensive that the costs approach new construction. Now, I'm not sure that referred to the prison, but that probably could refer to the prison site. And I urge anyone if this bill goes any further, to go down and, to look at it. And then finally, we had this special committee that just literally weeks ago finished its report, and again said this is good for other sites. I know that the governor, the chief executive officer of the state, the professionals who work for state government responsible for troubled youth, none have recommended this site. The people who know the matter best do not recommend this site. In short, ironically, no location in this state has had as many reports and statistics showing that it's not the right place for a new prison or a similar facility. Though I will admit, it's, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, that this a 6 to 10 bed facility was never, standalone by itself being proposed, but it was sometimes part of the proposal. And then you asked questions about the views of the people of Windsor, and I think that it is clear that the people of Windsor, the majority of the people of Windsor, would be opposed to this. And there's a long history of the people of Windsor in the state. And since I've been here, which doesn't go back 200 years, but it goes back, 20 years, that relationship has been very problematic. The state, I think, at times has treated Windsor shabbily. And people of Windsor are suspicious of the state because of the way they've been treated, things going on behind their back. And that's just how they feel today. I think I can speak, I think that's widely held. There's a great deal of suspicion. And this bill doesn't help. The idea that you'd have fit up, and I don't know where that word comes from, but fit up with a hyphen in between the fit and the up. The fit up costing more than $3 million for 10 beds, 6 to 10 beds on a temporary basis. I mean, it's just, people are just, I guess based on, their suspicions beginning already there, they say, this is absurd. This is either they say it's going to be the permanent site, and as Donna said, it's 10 beds and then it's 30 beds, and that history has played out before with us in the prison. So there's a suspicion there. So for whatever reason, and whether we think it's justified or not, I think mostly it is. Windsor will. It hasn't yet, because the time hasn't occurred, but there'll be select board meetings and meetings of WIC, and there's a town meeting coming up. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to get some hard data to back up what I'm predicting. Windsor will reject this, if that makes a big difference to you guys. So finally, speaking as an abutter, the surrounding area is a beautiful, the 25 acres wildlife management area for hunting, for shooting, for skimo. They have vast trails over it in the winter. Bird watching, people come from everywhere, the Audubon. It's an extraordinary community that Windsor has finally developed, and we hope to develop further to attract more and more people to come into town. And again, justified or not, having next door a place that I don't know will need barbed wire or not. I don't know, but it's a tough sell to have this next door, and it certainly won't help the efforts of the town to develop other buildings on the remaining site. So bottom line, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the Honorable Mr. Chairman, and the honorable members of the committee, there appears to be a need for a facility for troubled youth, but this facility should be located in the right place and built for the best price for the taxpayers of Vermont. A temporary solution should be temporary and should not cost $3 million, and most certainly should not be situated in the wrong place. Thank you very much for your time.
You have not met any of the citizens from Newbury yet, have you?
No, I've read about them, and I gather you represent them. So I trust you will do the right thing.
I'm being facetious to some extent, but let me say that your points are very well taken. I see another town as one of the serious considerations right now. that has even less appeal for this project than Windsor does. I'm not trying to poo-poo the presentation of Windsor. I think you've raised some very valid points. But at the same time, we are looking at having closed a facility that was averaging less than 5 individuals at any one given time, and we were spending gobs of money on that facility. We've closed it. We need to replace it with something, somewhere. And at the moment, we have only 2 proposals in front of us, neither of which, at least in my humble opinion, is sounding like a good idea. So I'm trying to get a handle on it all. Tom, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to address a comment that was made earlier, juxtaposing Windsor versus Newbury, and the fact that Newbury doesn't have robust emergency services and things like that. And Windsor has a hospital. We have 24/7 police. We have a paid full-time fire department, and we're a town of 3,500 people. So our municipal budget is pushing on $6 million. The same number of people live in Heartland and Wethersfield on the other side of us. Their budgets are around 2 million. So to think that because a town that has been pointed out has half the geography, 3,500 people, but because of our history of dense population and industry, require services of a town generally 10,000 or more, and that for the state to then consider, well, Windsor has all the things that could take care of things should something go wrong. And then on top of that, having a hospital who right now is begging for staff and can't find a house anywhere. So we're going to take 100 acres that theoretically could be housing, that could help the hospital, that could help our town budget, that could help our emergency services, and to turn that upside down and say, let's take it off the table for any kind of housing use, and let's put an additional burden on the already burdened fire and police services here. That's picking the right place. I mean, that may be the right place for the state, but for all those reasons, it's the absolute wrong place for here. And I do get a lot of that. Our fire and police are $1 million a piece. And that's a burden that our taxpayers take on, and they support it by about a 2/3 margin every year. But to have a facility like that, as Donna points out, they are going to be impacted by any type of facility like that goes there.
Yeah, Tom, I totally agree with you. My only reason for comparing Newbury was that Newbury has none of the services you've just outlined. So in this grand scheme of things, looking at a replacement site, if you're not the place and you're putting together that argument, Newbury is certainly not the place either. And we as a committee need to start pressing that issue before we spend a lot of money for no reason. Senator McCormick, you're up with a question. I wanted to provide Steve Howard a few minutes before we have to adjourn. So I don't know what you have.
I'll try to be brief. Donna reminisced about many years ago when both Senator Mazza and I were on this committee, where the chair, Senator Aluzzi, was pushing for a prison facility in Windsor. And the committee determined then that even though constitutionally the state has the power to put a prison where it wants, that because you can does not mean you should. And we took the position that we would not put a prison in a town that didn't want it. And there was a vote in Windsor. I claim I have a proprietary interest in that. That was something I asked this committee to do. There was a vote in Windsor, and Windsor voted against there being a prison facility in Windsor, which is why there is not. Which is why we did not put that prison there then.
It's a fair statement.
Springfield voted yes. Springfield voted yes. Not overwhelmingly, but they voted yes. And that's why the facility is there. So I would hope that we would continue that level of respect for the will of the community.
I do understand that and appreciate that. And for the same reason, I am scratching my head about, we were told specifically by the administration representatives that if Newbury did not want it, it would not go there. And now the state is in litigation against Newbury after Newbury very clearly said, we don't want it here. And that troubles me deeply. But we'll continue that conversation as a committee when we get the opportunity to have another conversation about this. For now, I want to shift to Steve Howard. Steve, welcome back to Senate Institutions. I'm sure we're going to see you again. And I hope you're relaying all these comments about Senator Luzzi back to Vince.
I text him the minute I hear his name.
He would like that.
Steve, your time's up.
You are the first person to say that to me, so you probably won't be the last. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. For the record, I'm Steve Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Vsea. And before I begin my testimony, I want to just relay some ancient history. When I made my first trip to Windsor under orders from the Speaker of the House that I was serving under at the time, and he told me that I was to go to Windsor and I was to meet a woman named Donna Swaney, and I wasn't to leave Windsor until she had agreed to run for the House of Representatives. So it took me not too long to convince her, but I felt like I might have to spend a little time in Windsor. And fortunately, Donna Swaney did agree to run for the legislature. So I get 100% credit for Donna Swaney. And I will argue with anybody who tries to take credit for her. Let me just try to refocus the argument or the discussion that we're having. For Vsea, this isn't about Windsor. On January 21st, 2021, one of our members was sexually assaulted because she was forced to watch a youth in a hotel room because there were no beds for that youth anywhere in the state as a result of the decision to close Woodside. And that is a situation that is raging out of control in the Department of Children and Families, Family Services Division. Just last week, on a Sunday evening, I had to wake the commissioner and pull him out of bed to intervene in a situation where a member of the Vsea was being asked to go sit in a situation with a youth who could have potentially been involved in one of the most serious crimes you can commit, seriously violent crimes you could commit. Our members are caseworkers. They're not corrections officers. They're not the trained staff that worked at the Woodside facility, a program that was nationally recognized by the Department of Justice and should never have been privatized. The decision to close Woodside was a disastrous one, and it is having real consequences for the children of our state and real consequences for our members. Their safety is in question and it is at risk. So for us, this legislation is about sounding the alarm about the crisis in the Department of Children and Families, both for our members and for our children. And what we are saying to the administration and what we are saying to the legislature that is charged with holding them accountable is time is not on our side. And we need an answer, whether it's in Windsor or wherever it is. We need those beds and we need them now. Not just for justice-involved youth, but also for CHINS-involved youth. Children who are in need of services. It's not just justice-involved youth. There are no beds for anybody. The plan that was put together and sold to the legislature was not thought through, was not thorough, and it is failing. And so that is the message that members of the Vsea have. We need something now in the next week or two. We don't need something 6 months from now. We need something now, urgently now, and we need something permanent. It is a mistake, as Vsea has stated and did state in these cases, both in the closure of the Windsor facility and in the closure of Woodside. It is a mistake to close state assets because you see in the process that we're seeing in Newbury and what you hear today in Windsor, how challenging it is to place a new facility in a community. So it is our hope that this committee will use the time it has in this session to hold accountable the administration who is ultimately responsible for the disaster on our hands. They are the ones who wanted to privatize the Woodside facility without an adequate plan. And so now the children are paying the price and our members are paying the price. And so that is the message that I would share with you, whether you support this bill and you put the facility temporarily in Windsor with a look at it being permanent, or you put it anywhere else in the state. What I'm saying is these are our children. These are our children. And we have got to do better by them. And we have got to do better by the family service workers, social workers who are charged with taking care of them. And that's really, I think, the message of the Vsea. So we're happy to support Senator Hooker's bill. We would be happy to support any proposal that gets us out of this crisis. That is really, I think, fundamentally the hope of the Vsea.
Okay. Committee, I don't know if anybody has any immediate questions, but let me pause to say it is now 3:58.5.
Yep.
And I do have a hard stop at 4 o'clock. This conversation will continue. But I wanted to take just a moment to thank everybody, especially those of you that have come from the town of Windsor to be with us today. It was a pleasure to meet all of you that I haven't met before, and I'm sure that this conversation will continue in such a way that you will eventually be involved, whether it is a state-owned facility or a public-private enterprise. So I am sure that we're going to continue the conversation in some form, but you certainly have given us a lot to think about today, and we appreciate you taking the time. So with that,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Alex, I'm going to ask you take us off of YouTube.